So, China, Canada, and Mexico have now announced retaliatory measures against the United States after President Donald Trump confirmed that his administration would be imposing sweeping tariffs on exports from Canada, Mexico, and China into the United States. This has marked a sharp escalation in trade tensions, particularly across North America. In fact, Canada and Mexico happen to be the two biggest trading partners of the United States. Will this upend the trade world order, as it were? And are we now on the cusp of a full-blown tariff war, which is in the offing? I decode. As of midnight Tuesday, the Trump administration added a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico. The administration also added another 10% tariff on all imports that come in from China. That comes on top of another 10% tariff on Chinese goods that was put into effect just a month ago. So that's a total of 20% tariffs on all goods imported from China. The tariffs make good on President Trump's campaign promise to rework America's trade relationships. In the short term, they are likely to encourage some manufacturers who want to sell to American customers to set up their factories inside the United States. But by altering the terms of trade between the US and its largest economic partners, the tariffs will also rattle global supply chains. Most importantly, it will also strain some of America's most important diplomatic relationships. But in the longer term, it will add significant costs for American consumers and for American manufacturers. That is something that Trump is currently discounting. Canada, Mexico, and China are the three largest trading partners of the United States. They account for more than 40% of both US imports and exports. The three countries supply the bulk of crude oil, beer, copper wire, toilet paper, and agricultural produce, from tomatoes to cucumbers, imported by the United States. The tariffs came as a bit of a surprise, given that Mexico and Canada had gone to great lengths in recent weeks to convince President Trump that they were stepping up the enforcement of their borders. President Trump had initially threatened back in November, when he got elected, that he's going to impose tariffs, saying that these three countries, Canada, Mexico, and China, were not doing enough to halt the flow of illegal drugs, fentanyl, and illegal immigrants who were coming into the United States. On Monday, Trump appeared to change the terms of this deal, saying that Canada and Mexico need to relocate their auto factories and other manufacturing plants into the United States. But here's the catch. One American car, whether it is manufactured by Ford or General Motors, at least 4 or 5 times it travels across the border between US and Canada and US and Mexico before the car can finally hit the showroom. Sometimes the same car has its tires assembled in Mexico, its chassis put together in Canada, and its electronic driving systems assembled in America. To impose tariffs every time a half-finished car crosses the border would inevitably raise the cost of the car itself. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada has said that his country would respond with its own tariffs of 25% on more than $150 billion worth of American goods. He said that tariffs on $30 billion would go into effect right away. The remaining tariffs would start in 21 days from now. Trudeau also said that less than 1% of the fentanyl that's seized at the US border actually originated in Canada. He firmly maintains that his country had taken steps to halt the flow of fentanyl, reducing the seizures to almost zero by the end of January. Even border crossings of illegal migrants had fallen significantly in the last couple of months. The Mexican government has also made significant efforts to enhance border security. It cracked down on cartels that were involved in fentanyl production. It also transferred dozens of leading cartel operatives to the United States. Mexico also further pledged to send 10,000 National Guard troops to the border to deter migration. It also reinforced earlier measures to break up these migrant caravans before they reached the American border. Mexican officials emphasized that these actions were crucial for Mexico's own national security. In fact, border activity had calmed down by the time Trump assumed office in January. In recent weeks, crossings fell to record lows. In the month of February, US personnel at the Mexican border reported just 200 migrants per day, which was a figure at one point of time which was unimaginable. Officials say that the drop in crossings was unprecedented. In Canada, which is just a minor source of fentanyl compared to Mexico, the threat of tariffs has sparked frustration and outrage amongst Canadians. It's also led to a surge of patriotism and anti-American sentiment, which was intensified by Trump's repeated calls for the annexation of Canada. Trump has somewhat repeatedly referred to Canada as the 51st state of the United States and referred to Justin Trudeau as Governor Justin. Shortly after Trump became president-elect, he first made the tariff threat in November. Trudeau at that time flew down to Florida to meet President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, his estate and private club. Canada then began assembling a list of retaliatory tariffs and put together a plan to increase security at the border. That included appointing a fentanyl czar, leasing Black Hawk helicopters for the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for their patrols at the border, as well as buying a fleet of American-made drones. Just days before these tariffs were imposed, some business leaders who were part of a Canada-US trade relations group met with Trudeau, and they were already voicing pessimistic concerns that all this lobbying, all the alliance building would actually amount to nothing. Steve McCannon, who's Canada's employment minister, said that the government would move to introduce extra wage support for workers who are left jobless because of these tariffs. Economists have also estimated that the tariffs will lower economic growth throughout North America, but they will hit Canada and Mexico harder than it would hit the United States. Both Canada and Mexico roughly send about 80% of their exports to the United States. In contrast, China sends only about 15% of its exports to the US, so China is much less exposed to these Trump tariffs. While Canada and Mexico have worked hard to appease Trump, China did not make any such overtures. The Chinese government did not want to be seen as pleading and begging Trump because it was wary of offering any concessions to Trump before it understood the parameters of these tariffs. In a statement, a spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said that China was strongly dissatisfied and would take countermeasures to safeguard its rights and interests. The spokesperson of the Chinese Commerce Ministry also accused the United States of disregarding facts and international trade rules and described the entire episode as American bullying. Eventually, all affected countries are hoping that this would raise prices on American consumers, and that is something Trump cannot afford to ignore. Tariffs and taxes on Americans and American businesses, not on foreign governments or companies. Adding tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico will raise prices for Americans at a time when inflation is their number one concern. It's also the number one reason why Trump got elected back in November, and he cannot afford to betray the spirit of that mandate. I want to quickly go across to Canadian journalist Terry Miliuski, who's been tracking this story for a number of years now. Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on about $30 billion worth of American goods coming into Canada and another $100 billion plus in 3 weeks' time. Are we on the cusp of a full-blown North American free trade war?
Well, it's going to mean pain all round, but most particularly in the United States. Canada has some experience from the time that Trump was president the first time, when it tried a strategic series of retaliatory tariffs targeted to people in districts which supported Mr. Trump and had influence with then President Trump. And this time they're building on that experience to try to inflict as much pain as they can on influential Americans. And that whereas Trump is using this sort of blunt instrument, hit everything with 25%, 10% on oil and gas, Canada plans to be much more strategic and to inflict much more politically strategic pain.
So, I'm just curious about the political fallout of this. The Liberal Party, which is the ruling party in Canada, elects a new leader by the end of this week. Mr. Carney, who was the former central bank governor, seems to be the front runner. Has this sort of upped his chances even more because you want to have a person who knows the economics of it, how to deal with the Trump tariffs, as well as the politics of it? You want to have a person who comes across as standing up to Trump.
The tariffs have completely upended Canadian politics. It's questionable in my mind as the country seems to rally around the government in this time of crisis, boycotting American goods, flying the Canadian flag, standing up to the big bully down south. There's a tremendous national spirit going on. People are refusing, speaking of spirits, to buy American booze. And it's questionable in this environment whether Trudeau would have even quit, as he did shortly before this all erupted. But too late now, but it's certainly changed the calculations for the Liberals, who were previously considered to be inevitable losers of the next election. Now, not so clear by any means.
It's going to be a fascinating election coming up in about 6 months' time. Thank you very much, Mr. Terry Miliuski, for joining us with your thoughts and perspective into both the economic fallout and the political fallout of the Trump tariff war.